Hello, today we'd like to consider circuit theorems. Now, before we go through the theorems, we have to get to know some basic part of a circle. Alright, so let's start. Now, let's assume that this is our circle. The first thing we are going to consider is the center. So let's assume that this is our center. That is the first part. The center indeed is the middle point of the circle. So our first part is the center of a circle. Now the second part is going to be the radius. And what is the radius? Indeed, the radius is the distance from the center to any point on the circle. So let's say from the center up to this side. This distance is what we refer to as the radius. Okay, so we have our radius. Now the next part we are going to consider is the diameter. And what is the diameter? Diameter is that distance from one point on the circle to another point on the circle, but this line passes through the center. So it means that the line drawn, let's say from this point, it passes through the center up to this side. This line becomes what we call the diameter. All right, so we have this to be the diameter, and that is our third part. All right. But if you look at what we are having here, the diameter is equal to 2 times the radius. Because if from this point to this point is radius, let's say r, and then from this point to this point to is radius, then indeed the diameter is equal to 2 times radius, 2r. So we take note of that. All right. Now let's move to our fourth part. The fourth part is going to be a chord. And what is a chord? A chord is any distance from one point on the circle to another point on the circle, that straight line. So let's assume that you are having this particular line. So let's say from this point up to this side. This line becomes the chord. So we have this to be the chord. All right. The next part we want to consider is the circumference of a circle. Now, what is the circumference of a circle? It's also the same as the perimeter of the circle, the distance around the circle. Okay, so if you are to consider the distance around this circle, so this distance is what we refer to as the circumference of the circle. All right, so we have the circumference. The next part we are going to consider is an arc of a circle. Now, what is an arc of a circle? An arc is part of circumference of a circle. So let's say this particular circumference that we are having here, I take part of that. So let's say just this part. All right, so let's say from this A to B, just this part, that part there is known as an arc. Okay, so this is our arc. The arc, we have minor arc and a major arc. So this particular arc that we are having here, this one is the minor arc because it's the small part. The remaining part becomes a major arc. All right, so for arc, we have a minor arc and then major arc. So you take note of that. That is for an arc. Okay. The next part we are going to consider is a segment. So a segment. Okay. Now, what is a segment? A segment indeed is the area or the space between a chord and an arc. So let me complete the arc here. All right. The space between this particular chord and this arc is what we refer to as the segment. So this particular shaded region or shaded portion, that is what we refer to as the segment. All right. Now for the segment 2, we have minor segment and then major segment, because this particular chord that we are having here, this chord indeed is dividing the circle into two parts. So the one down here, that is the minor segment, and then the one on top becomes the major segment. Okay, so whatever that we are having here becomes the major segment. All right, so that is the major segment. So for segment 2, yes, we have minor and then major. You take note of that. All right, so we have our segment here. So for the segment 2, we have the minor and then the major. We are left with one part of a circle, and that is the sector. What is a sector? A sector is indeed the space formed between two radii and an arc. So if we are to consider this particular part from this point up to this point, this is one radius, and then from this point to this side, that is another radius. And from what we are having, this is also an arc. All right. So that space forming there, that is what we refer to as a sector. All right. So this becomes our sector, the shaded region here. That is our sector. And for sector 2, we have the minor sector and then major sector. Okay, so this is our sector. Now on to, as we said, we have the minor and then major. So basically, these are the parts of the circle that you have to know before we start the circle theorem. If you want to get to know the theorem, then watch the next video. Thanks.